I'm Dan Drake. This is Front Up on Visitor Network TV. Sometimes one stumbles on a story that comes out of the blue. And this is a particularly unusual one because the subject that's involved here is archaeology. And often, many of us at least, think of archaeology as something that is going on in faraway places. In fact, we have a visitor today, DavidLandon, Associate Director of the Fisk Institute for Archaeological Research at UMass Boston.
Yep.
Who is digging right here on Nantucket. And he's here. David, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Nice to have you, and love to hear about the dig that you're involved in.
I guess first I should apologize for my attire today, but we actually are actively in the midst of this project right now. And we're doing this as a collaborative project with the Museum of African American History. And we're working right next at the house that's right next to the African Meeting House. And we're engaged in essentially the preservation project for that house.
Can you tell us a little bit about the background of the house?
The house is actually has a really amazing history because it was built by a man named Seneca Boston, who was a freed slave and who was a weaver.
And this was in the early 18...
This was right before the American Revolution.
Oh,
so there's
early?
a
Okay.
1774 reference to him and the property. It's not surprising he was a weaver because this is coming out of the time when the sheep and is big part of the economy here. He married a Wampanoag woman who lived on the island named Thankful Micah. And then their children and their children's children became kind of key members of the community of color that was around the meeting house in the area that was then called New Guinea. And our archaeology project then is kind of...
But there's also a continuity in the family and so forth of the house, which is quite remarkable.
Yeah, so this house actually passed through a whole series of African American households, with the exception, I guess, of about 1 year of being rented to a white family. It was African American families throughout. And with the last woman who lived there for a long time was Florence Higginbotham, who lived there for much of the 20th century, and who actually was kind of instrumental in saving the meeting house next door. She had the foresight to buy that when it was about to fall down, and her daughter-in-law donated the house, knowing something about its history, to the museum to kind of link with with the African Meeting House and make kind of an interpretive center there
and
for
provide
visitors.
A link to the community.
And provide a link to the community.
House, yeah.
Yes, and so the longer range plan is to preserve the buildings there and use that, make that into a kind of a functional public space linked to the meeting house. And interpreted it.
So what caused this dig to happen?
So we started working with the museum I guess about 6 years ago now, trying to kind of determine, well, if we're doing a preservation project, where might there be digging on the property that would potentially destroy kind of what we would think of as buried cultural resources? If we think of the house kind of as worthy of preservation, is there anything buried in the yard that's worthy of preservation? So we're kind of digging in the footprint of areas where they're going to put foundations under some outbuildings to try and preserve the outbuildings.
I think it might be useful for you to provide another perspective to the audience about where archaeology fits into the spectrum, the cultural spectrum, so to speak, and your view on that.
You know, you started off mentioning that most people think of this as being very distant, very kind of exotic places. We're all excited to be on Nantucket and see that as kind of exotic for us. So I'm here with a group of students who are really excited to be out here and working on this summer, and other colleagues of mine from UMass Boston. And you know, we kind of specialize. We have a whole group that kind of specializes in the kind of the archaeology of the local, like this is. We work a lot on historic sites. We work kind of at the margin between history and archaeology, and we also really like projects where we can engage with the community. So the preservation aspect, the desire of the museum to ultimately kind of interpret this site for the community, We like to think that the archaeology can engage that, and we can learn some about the households that were there and find ways to help bring their narrative and their story to life with some of the objects that they had in their houses.
What kinds of things have you found?
Part of the excitement.
When did you start digging, first of all?
So we've been working at the site for about and being Nantucket in the summer, we had some housing issues. We had to stop for a few days. We're back again. We're ultimately going to dig for about 3 weeks, spread out over the course of a month at the site, and we have a crew of about 10 people working right now, and the archaeology at the site is really phenomenal. Not all sites really have a lot of material preserved. At this site, they changed the level of the lot over time by trying to raise it. It was much steeper in the past than it is today. They raised the level of the lot by throwing out trash and filling over it and raising it up over time. So we have lots of kind of layers related to all these different families and households.
And over 3 centuries, really.
Over a long period of time. So we have that kind of preserved in the record at the site. And so a lot of what we find is kind of common household trash, bottles and plates. And this site is also interesting because we've got a lot of kind of clothing artifacts, buttons and clasps and straight pins and kind of lots of, we don't really find the clothes very often, they don't get preserved, but we find the buttons and clasps and things like that.
Any tools of that sort of thing?
We found a few tools, mostly kind of things you'd think of as kitchen tools, so knives and forks and things like that. Lots of architectural materials, so remnants of remodeling and tearing down and rebuilding buildings.
What's going to happen to all this material when you're through bringing it to the surface, so to speak?
So there's a long process of actually trying to figure it all out. So we will actually take this collection back to UMass Boston for the short term. And try to go through the process of kind of identifying and cataloging and figuring out the date of all this. We'd really like, ultimately, to find a way to get some of this on display at the site. We'd love to find some artifacts that kind of connect us to the story of some of these families and allow kind of part of the interpretation of the house to have some objects that were actually in the house and use that as kind of a jumping off point for telling some of the stories of the occupants of the house.
Very interesting. The students that are doing this, they are presumably concentrating in archaeology, or is this just a summer job for them? You
know, we actually have a master's program specifically in historical archaeology. So the students who are here are they're a self-selected group. They're already in a graduate program for archaeology. So as you can imagine, they're ecstatic about this. Digging on Nantucket in the summer, and a really interesting site with a very interesting story to tell. And one of the students is actually going to take this on as her master's thesis research project. So she's going to write up the results of our work in what will hopefully also be a public document, so that people will make this accessible, so that people can see the results of this. And over the long run, we also hope to help the museum in very specific ways, kind of develop maybe even some more accessible public projects, maybe making a 10-page booklet version of the results of the archaeology that people could get at the site, or something along those lines.
What are the sort of intellectual and psychic rewards from a project like this?
We had one of the most amazing experiences you have as an archaeologist. We had descendants of Florence Higginbotham come visit the archaeology and come see us at the site. And so Florence Higginbotham's daughter-in-law, who actually donated the property to the museum, was there, and her grandson and great-grandchildren, who never even knew her, but were there to see the site and to connect to some of this history. And the descendants and the family have kind of a real emotional connection to what we're doing. And and couldn't have been more kind of excited that we were taking the effort to actually preserve all of this history of their ancestors. It really, it's hard to, you know, we talked to them and they did a kind of presentation at the Meeting House one evening, and everyone came out of it just really charged up about what we were doing, because it's not just an academic exercise. There's actually a community that really is linked to and concerned about the results that we're going to get from this work.
Are any of the family members still on Nantucket?
I'm not sure how long they stayed. I think they might have...
No, I mean, but none of them, do any of them still live here that you know of?
I don't think there are any actual direct descendants that still live on the island. So these were people, I think the daughter-in-law was coming from California. I'm not sure I remember where the grandson was coming from, but they were coming from off of Nantucket and kind of reconnecting with some of this. So
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
How does this fit in the general spectrum of the kinds of things you do? Is it comparable to the other projects that you work on and you have the students work on?
You know, it's comparable in some ways. It's different in some ways. We really do, whenever we can, like to work on projects where we're engaging the community, and that's part of the attraction of working on something that's local and working on something that's recent. There are people who have an interest in what we're doing and are connected to the history, and clearly on a place like Nantucket, where the whole kind of environment is so much about kind of the historic preservation and telling the stories of the people who lived here in the past. We love being able to have projects that kind of link and connect to that, obviously. Not all of them are equally successful in doing that. And quite frankly, not all the places we go digging do we really find interesting things. And so the site has a great history to connect to, and the archaeology that we've been doing has just been really fabulous, really great.
Well, I understand in a sense you're digging in a trash pile.
We're digging in a trash pile,
which is
yes.
interesting, but how does that compare digging on Nantucket, the physical, technical aspect of digging here, to some other places where you have much rockier soil, much more clay and so forth than you have here?
Everybody likes it when it's a lot of sand, because we sift everything through screens, sometimes very fine screens. So if it's a lot of sand, it goes through the screen easily. Everyone loves that. It's interesting in some ways because, you know, I don't think people kind of envision the town here as kind of urban, but in a sense, the digging that we're doing is a little bit more like an urban environment in the sense of, you know, we're in kind of the back lot of the house, and it was very intensively used.
That whole neighborhood was very intensively used.
Yeah. So you know, the density of the houses, these small spaces with small back lots that really got intensively used.
And lots of people. And
lots of people. That's much more kind of an urban characteristic. So, and certainly, you know, in its heyday, kind of the density and the real kind of town aspect. So the digging has a kind of a flavor of that too, with kind of lots of complex features, deep excavations, and it's kind of gives a flavor to it in a certain sense.
How long are you going to be there? Till the middle of August?
We are wrapping up the 10th of August currently as scheduled. So, and we're hoping to have a couple of open house days towards the end of our work. So on Wednesday the 6th and Friday the 8th, I think I'm getting those dates right. The 10th, the Sunday. It makes Friday the 8th, right? So Wednesday the 6th and Friday the 8th, we're going to have open houses from 1 to 3 at the site.
It may be a little late to get those on for us,
yeah,
for our taping, but hopefully there'll be notifications in other publications and media.
We're going to work with the museum to get the word out about that.
Right.
And hopefully have the opportunity to invite people to come and walk through and see what we're doing.
I might show up myself.
Excellent, excellent. We hope to have some artifacts on display during that time too.
Well, David, thank you very much. DavidLandon from the Fisk Institute for Archaeological Research at UMass Boston.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.